doesn't
trial,
know.
you would want to lean over backward to make sure that the procedural guarantees that are implicit in the American trial are observed here.
Absolutely. I certainly agree with that. I guess my question was, given that obviously there can't really be anyone in this country who doesn't know what's been going on.
Well, you say that's one question. Is could you still respond to the evidence?
Yes,
so
they are allowed to know as long as they say that they would be able to.
I think so.
Okay.
Well, I have to look that up too, but that's my
Your recollection.
That's my recollection of it. Yeah.
Okay.
So, I think, as I say, they're all imperfect choices. Of course, Nuremberg was full of imperfect choices. To have the Russians sitting there.
Yeah, the co-conspirators as part of the tribunal is not perfect at all.
Right. It's
no.
And so also Nuremberg was subject to different difficulty that indeed we were perhaps remiss in not bringing up this morning. People could say it is only the victors that can give it.
Sure, absolutely.
A trial, and that's true, and that's. But it may be, if you have the right kind of victors, it is better to have a trial that is a victor's trial than no trial at all.
Mm-hmm. Sure. And absolutely. Certainly a trial is better than...
Well, it depends on who the victor is. We're the victor, yes.
That's true, I agree.
And a victor who is responsive to the needs of fairness and procedural regularity and so on. And I think this was brought up. One thing that I think is true of Nuremberg that maybe deserves a little more emphasis than we gave it is that even people who criticize the idea of the trial, when they came to Nuremberg and watched the proceedings and then read the judgment and looked at the transcript, which few of them did, they were persuaded that this was a fair trial.
Okay, great. I think that's pretty much... Is there anything else that I haven't talked to you about that maybe you think should be brought forth in my article?
No, there's an open question. Yeah, there is. There's one thing. Why don't you explain to Steve about Robert Jackson's birthday party?
Oh,
Actually,
yeah.
okay.
Well, this raises a
Oh, yeah, it was in your article.
Yeah.
Yes,
yeah.
that was a very amusing story.
Well, it also, the point was made from Jackson's, the statement that I guess John read from Jackson. One of the purposes of the trial, secondary purpose, was to have a post-war act of collaboration with the Russians. Now, the Russians were very difficult allies. If I remember Churchill's volumes about the war, he tells about merchant marines, British merchant marines, that made this terrible trip up to Murmansk, and they turned up in Russian hospitals. And the British wanted some English-speaking nurses to come and look after these guys. Well, the Russians, of course, viewed each nurse as a potential spy. And this took months to work out. And there were all sorts of tensions, so that the trial as an exercise in international collaboration was not exactly a roaring success.
No.
And so that is one aspect of the background for the story I tell about Jackson. And the other is that the Russian GI was infatuated with wristwatches that had Mickey Mouse on the face. So there's a birthday party for Jackson, and somebody got a watch from our little PX, nice Swiss watch. Jackson was very gracious, thanks everybody, and says, by the way, where'd this watch come from? And some wag says, from the Russians, of course. And quick as a flash, Jackson said, that's fine. That's really fine. Up to now, I haven't been able to get even the time of day. And I was very conscious of that because, as I may have told John, when the case was divided and the Russians got war crimes and crimes against humanity in the East, we took all the briefs we had, this was the economic unit, went over to the Russians and gave it to them and gave them the documents, and they got any document we had was accessible. From time to time, we thought maybe the Russian had captured a document that might fill out a hole in our case. Mm-hmm. So I'd write a note, and I wrote 13 notes, and I never got, for my unit, and never got an answer. And
not even an answer.
Not an answer.
Not even we don't
so
have.
Finally, I went with my interpreter to the Russian second in command, and I said it politely, in effect, well, and he said, well, of course we don't have anything. If we've had something, we would have answered your inquiry. But I don't believe anybody in the prosecution got a scrap of paper.
No.
Incredible. All right?
Well, do you think that was partly because, I mean, it's clear that if Ribbentrop deserved to hang, then Molotov deserved the gallows right next to him. And do you think they were concerned that any document that was turned over in that sense might incriminate them?
There's great fear in anybody who worked for the Russians. Mm-hmm. There's great fear. And it was easier to carry out an absolute policy of no documents than making judgments. And this, incidentally, there was the same kind of difficulty with the Russians in all sorts of contexts. I remember, who was that? Clayton. Clayton, who'd been Undersecretary of State, was going to dicker with the Russians after the war. And I happened to bump into him, and I said, well, how do you feel about doing business with the Russians? He said, I'm an old cotton trader. I think you can make a deal with anybody. And he went off to Moscow, and I saw him on his way back. So I said, how do you make out with the Russians? He said, that is a negotiating situation that I could not imagine and that I could not cope with. It's just very difficult to do business.
Mm-hmm.
Tell the story of the party of which Chief Justice Lawrence's daughter was dancing.
No, it wasn't his daughter. No, it was a Russian.
Oh.
It was a party with a very well-dressed, good English-speaking, and very attractive young woman was dancing with an English captain. She had, apparently there was some, what should I say, non-ideological chemistry at work. And 3 days later, she was gone.
Really?
Gone. Yeah. So.
Were you also part of that Russian party where everybody's, maybe it was Whitney talking about?
Yeah. Well, when you went to a party with the Russians, the idea was to have a drinking contest. And they always won. I mean, you have all these toasts. And so finally some Americans played dirty pool. They spiked the Russians' drinks and knocked them all out. That's contrary to the laws of war.
You were even talking yesterday about contrary to the war of camaraderie between you Navy folks. Whitney apparently had access to more liquor than the rest of you guys. How come?
Well, he went to London. I don't know. He was smarter than
He was an operator, huh?
He was an operator. The guys that really had the stuff were the Air Force.
Right. Did you stay put, more or less, once you were in Nuremberg,
No,
or did you roam around?
No, I went to I, I, I went to Hamburg. So when I was an officer, so he was one arm, so I would light my match and, try to light a cigarette. But I was an officer. He took it from me, lit mine, and got it back to his own quickly without starting the fire. And that was the ritual. That was the ritual. That was, but I stayed, and I was in Paris for a bit. I went home. First, home to Washington, to get to look for some evidence and so on.
Well, cigarettes was I'm sorry.
No, I'm done.
Cigarettes was a hot commodity.
Oh, cigarette for Germany was the coin of the realm.
Yeah.
Oh yes. Yeah, I've told some of you. First time I got to Nuremberg, I had dinner, German waiter, and I got take out my wallet and I asked the older hand, "But what do we leave these guys?" I said, "You leave them 3 cigarettes." I said, 3 cigarettes? It's insulting. He said, "They'd rather have the cigarettes than the Reichsmarks, which apparently were not worth much in the market." And so after a while, first time you kind of cringe, and then after a while it becomes currency. Anything can be currency if people respect its value or as a medium of exchange.
Didn't somebody buy an automobile?
Oh yeah. There was a lot. A lot of people suffered from the occupationitis, and they did a lot on the black market. But we had a very strict no fraternization rule, and I think I don't know anybody in the prosecution that didn't observe it.
Yeah. Right. Where were you living? You were in a...
I was in, a short time I was in the Grand Hotel, but that was when I first got there, and then I had a villa. I had a villa with 7 other officers, and we had people looked after us.
Okay. Other prosecution staff?
Yeah,
people, or
prosecution staff.
Who else was in your house?
Well, there was an English captain. I have someplace and a Frenchman. It was a very nice villa.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
So,
John asked you guys a lot of questions today.
yeah.
Was there a question you expected him to ask that he didn't? You were anticipating?
I'll tell you. Even if there were such a question, that John did such a marvelous job, I wouldn't mention it in his presence.
I'll step out if you've got a good one. I'll watch the tape.
That's the problem, Steve. All these law professors stick together.
No, I think John. The only. I'll answer that question, provided it's off the table.
Oh, sure, absolutely.
The only thing
That's not going anywhere.
I thought that John might have asked, my friend here has asked, what is the relevance of Nuremberg to a double-barrel question, to whatever proceedings may take place against Osama bin Laden, assuming we capture him alive, which I hope we don't. First, the relevance, and second, assuming there has to be a trial, what kind of tribunal should we have? I just hoped John would not ask that question.
How about Greg does?
I've been asking around informally. I just haven't gotten to you, but that's too big.
It's a big question. That's right.
Question.
It's a big question.
But what, for us,
What
are your thoughts on that? We hope
the convention.
If he's not killed and he's captured.
He's not. We've said we're going to bring justice to him, and Nuremberg suggests a trial.
Right.
But as I was hinting during our conversation, the circumstances of Nuremberg are utterly different. Germany was devastated. The whole world wanted justice. There was no opposition to a trial, to justice, either executive justice or a trial. No one was suggesting let these people go free. And so the trial, I say, was not a perfect alternative, but it was better than anything else in my view. Now, here, we want a trial that's fair, but we also want to avoid alienating populations that are important to us. So, one bit of conventional wisdom that is emerging is that we should have a tribunal on which a Muslim sits. Well, I don't know how we pick the Muslim. And the notion is that a Muslim will make a trial more palatable to would-be martyrs or the Muslim world. I am very dubious about that assumption. And as I've said to our friend here, certainly the experience in Yugoslavia does not bear that assumption out. The Serbs view the tribunal as biased against Serbia, as a tool of Western powers, and so on. And I think the Muslims, although I know little about them, would react even more strenuously. So if you don't have that benefit, the question is, what are the potential costs? And if you have if you pick the wrong Muslim, and by the wrong Muslim I mean one that won't respond to the evidence, and if we have a dissent, this would really backfire, and the very credibility that we wanted to enhance would be undermined. So the question is, what is the likely gain if we have that kind of a tribunal, and how does it match up to the risks? And although these are very difficult questions, my hunch is that the risks override the potential for gain. So then you say, all right, what are your other alternatives? Well, of course, I'm sure all sorts of federal statutes were violated, but the notion of a jury trial and some defense lawyer picking a jury, trying to pick a jury in New York, a jury that will say it unbiased in the sense what it could give a fair trial, even though it has an opinion, that seems to me a very iffy proposition, given the fact that the commander-in-chief has launched a war, having found this guy guilty. There's a big problem there. And then another alternative, again imperfect, is to have something like a military tribunal. I don't know whether there is enough in the Articles of War and federal statutes to be a basis for jurisdiction here. The one question is, well, if we have a military tribunal here, should there have been a military tribunal, or could there have been with respect to McVeigh? Or what is the line? Is it different because this conspiracy was hatched abroad and was financed from abroad, and the prime defendant has in effect declared war against the United States? I think we have terrible alternatives here, and so I really hope we don't have to face them within this room.
Yeah.
But if we face them, I think it's going to be a very tough call, and I think there'll be an enormous pressure from the United States and perhaps Britain to keep control. And although we'll get a lot of flack if we have an American military tribunal or an American British, my hunch is that we might go that way. But I don't know.
Yeah.
But as they say, then all these trials, and this one in particular, because the world is divided here. I mean, the Muslim world, even our so-called Muslim allies, they're against terror, but they're also against a response to terror. Again, our response was not perfect, but it was better than the alternative.
That's a very good analysis. I mean, it does come back to hoping that he's not captured.
Oh yeah, but I mean,
Which,
it's very. there is kind of, this is the point I was trying to make somewhat, perhaps more tactfully when I say, there is a tendency to ignore the special circumstances of Nuremberg and to jump from Nuremberg to situations that involve a new nest of difficulties. And this one certainly does.
Well,
Question with thought, I'm certainly no legal scholar, but isn't there a provision in international law that pirates and things like common pests can be hanged by the military after military trial?
That
I know the navies used to do that to pirates all the
piracy,
time.
right. Piracy was an international crime. Not only was it an international crime, with individuals were held accountable. And indeed, when people talked about the evolving common law of international law, piracy was an example, and the Hague Convention itself, which defined the laws of war, did not explicitly provide for individual punishment, but if an army captured somebody who was guilty of a violation of the laws of war, the army would do military justice. So no, and that was all part of the background for Jackson's argument that the international law quote system had no central legislature. It was more just like the common law in the early period of its history. It was important to have a situation that evolved to respond to the changing moral sentiments of a community. And that's how murder became a common law crime. We don't have common law crimes under the federal system. So that you do have those instances, but that doesn't settle the question of whether, in this case, the Articles of War, read in the light of our statutes, provide a basis for jurisdiction. My hunch is that they do, but I would not want to give an opinion until I had some young, energetic person write the first memorandum.
I'm going to switch gears completely.
Sure.
Give me your reflections on interviewing Hermann Goering.
Well, he was very interesting. He was arrogant. He was nimble. He saw the thrust of a question when you put it. He was unrepentant. Everything was obsolete. This was total war. And indeed, if one, he didn't say this, there were serious questions about the British bombardment, saturation bombing. And I have to say that if we had lost the war and I had a higher rank, I probably would have been a war criminal because I had something to do with the planning of the firebombing of Tokyo.
Mm-hmm.
And my last sentence of the memo. I mean, these were smart guys that knew about, the engineering and so on. And I was a guy that my role was say, well, if I understand it, then a general or admiral will understand it. So I tried to turn it into English. And the last sentence was, this program, this was after all the technical stuff, this program raises legal and moral questions that must be resolved at the highest level of responsibility. Pass the buck. So I've been thinking of my child as a war criminal.
Wow.
But anyhow, but coming back to your Goering point, not only was arrogant, it's sort of interesting kind of irony at work. The interpreter was obviously a refugee. And the court reporter was also a refugee. Goering understood English, but he preferred, as one always should, in tough situations, to use his own language. And for some strange reason, we would put these people under the oath. And everybody took the oath without a question. And Goering said, don't take the oath. I am prepared to swear to what I say, but not to what, turning to the interpreter, not to what he says. I think one more not so subtle anti-Semitic dig.
Right.
You know? So, but he was smart. We chatted. He was. This didn't come out in the interrogation. He was very proud that he scored second in one of the American intelligence tests. They all took the intelligence test. Shocked got the best marks.
Mm-hmm.
Goering was satisfied at being second to Schock. And he was very nimble. And there is an Englishwoman who collected some stuff on Nuremberg that had a great phrase about Goering. He had the charisma of evil. And I think that sums it up.
What was your highlight over there? As you reflect back on maybe the most momentous event of Nuremberg?
Oh, I suppose my highlight was standing up to the podium, you know.
How young were you? You were
I won the child. I was, let's see, when was this?
January 46.
January of 46. I would have been 30.
Right.
30. Is that right? 19.
55 years younger than you are now.
Right.
Well, then I've been 31. My arithmetic is not as good as it used to be. Anyhow, so, but, you know, there was a famous first line that happily was written out of the transcript. Sam Harris, who had been with the SEC with me, in fact was my housemate, I forget what case he presented, and he got up, and apparently to calm his nervousness, he said to the tribunal, now just imagine, there's Jeffrey Lawrence, Sir Jeffrey then was, presiding, and Sam Harris, this young American captain, gets up and says, if you hear a funny noise, there's nothing wrong with the audio system. These are my knees buckling. I have not been so nervous since I asked my wife to marry her. To marry me.
Right. Not the right time.
Not the right time.
Right.
Not the right
And I
time.
think that would have gotten lost in translation, you know?
Well, it was, somebody was kind enough to
delete
erase it from the transcript. Yeah.
The Shakespeare
Yeah,
reference in Jackson's
Yeah.
summation. Can you talk about that and tell
the closing.
the closing? Right. The Richard
I
III.
think it's, from Richard III. I think he's Gloucester, whom apparently killed the king, talking to the widow and of the king, talking to the queen, and says to her, I'll do it in my own English, saith not that I slew him, and what does she say? But he is dead, and he's Gloucester is bloodstained, but there's something else that I'm missing before. How can I say it? He did not say he is dead, and then Jackson goes on and says, if these men are not guilty, and say there was no war, there was no no extermination, those were his final lines. It's just absolutely wonderful close.
Did you get a sense, having
I wasn't there.
No.
I'd gone home by then.
Right, you were gone by the
Oh,
closing,
yes.
but you heard the opening statement. You were-
Oh, yes,
You're in the courtroom?
Was it?
just magnificent. Just magnificent.
I mean, we know it is now as
No,
as
no,
a
but
piece
I
of
mean,
literature, but even
it
as an
just,
event.
it laid the you see, you gotta remember, the Americans had the conspiracy camp.
Right.
So the Americans could wander over the whole field. And Jackson really gave in thumbnail the history of the regime and the oppressions and so on. And, you know, had wonderful phrases. In a way, one hated to cannibalize the talk by quoting a few excerpts, but there's that wonderful statement, 4 nations flushed with victory, so on, subordination of power to reason, but it was electric. It was electric.
And did the whole court feel it when he?
Well, it's very hard, to know how somebody else feels, but
Sure.
I would be astonished, there was this silence, and I'm sure it moved off the court.
What about the films? Were you in court when the films were played?
Yeah. What happened with the concentration camp was divided into 2 parts. The films were played to spice up, if that is the word, the drab presentation of the document. Remember, if you were working pretty hard, you couldn't go to court every day. So you picked your times. The films had an enormous impact. And the films were played out of order. And in a way, that fixed attention on them. This was something special. And you saw these corpses. And those photos were reproduced in Time and Newsweek, and they had an impact on the American public. When I was sort of drafted for the preparation of the concentration camp case, my buddies dug up 2 items of evidence that had an enormous impact on the court. And I've described them in some of the stuff I wrote, but these were 2 death books from the Mauthausen concentration camp. And these are the records. The books were a list of people who died in the concentration camp, and they had all died in alphabetical order at fixed intervals of time, and in every case, they had died of heart failure. So here was, you see, the German-minded work. You had to have a record, and they made it. And the most incriminating record. And those books were described without a word of editorial comment, and you could hear the hush in the courtroom. So, but Jackson's opening statement just was that just magnified.
Did you get any sense in looking at the defendants as they were listening to this opening statement? Were there reactions?
Well, it depended. Some of them, gosh, it's a long time ago. The military people, on the whole, pled ignorance of the extermination policy against Jews. And it depended on what the charge was. When sometimes shocked, just turned his chair around. He wasn't. This had nothing to do with him. Funk. I don't know if you know this. The Reichsbank became the receptacle for teeth, gold teeth, spectacles, jewelry, anything of value that could be retrieved from concentration camp victims. So they had all this stuff, and some of it was melted down and sold. And in pre-trial interrogation, Funk wept and said he didn't know anything about it. So, did he know, or did he not want to know? I mean, this was an enormous store of stuff. And to think of some subordinate, and particularly given the traditions of the German civil servant, just sticking this stuff in without the boss guy knowing it, strained your credulity. But when you looked at these guys, stripped of their insignia and their uniforms and the gray prints and uniforms, said, hey, these guys shook the world and mastered almost all of it for a time. It was just an incredible business. Particularly if the war was a very close situation, even D-Day. If Hitler had been willing to commit the reserves,
It could have been thrown back.
no, who knows? Well, all right.
All right.
Well, all right.
Thank you very much.
I have one or two more. Well, I've been reading a lot of stuff
So
since.
what'd you find out?
Well, he had a lot of pressure on him to make the trial more Jewish and to make the trial less Jewish.
I don't think that. I don't know that entered. Now,
Am I right? You're Jewish?
yeah, you're right about that.
Okay. And were you the only Jewish lawyer to go to the podium?
Sam Harris.
Sam Harris. Okay.
I'd have to look.
Okay.
There is something in Whitney's book. Got it.
Was
I don't know about Kempner.
Was it a big deal either way to sort of have Jewish lawyers or not have Jewish lawyers?
I did not give it a thought. Now, I knew that's not quite true. And I don't know whether it's being Jewish or just the nature of the trial. I said procedurally, and the stuff that came to me, there were a couple of items which I could specify. Said, we got to lean over backwards. So, well, there are several things. For example, pre-trial, we had some Treasury people, interrogators, tough guys. We learned that the Treasury people would say that they would dress some of their own people up in Russian uniforms. And they'd say to some witness that they thought was recalcitrant, hey, you better come clean, or we'll turn you over.
Wow.
So we stopped that.
Right.
That wasn't,
Right.
that
No, that's
wasn't
not-
so. I don't think I knew there was a special problem of, what should I say, of excessive aggressiveness in relation. And I think the best protection for it was to be aware of it. But I don't remember any talk about it. Obviously, I would not necessarily be privy to it. I just, and so far as recruitment was concerned, I wouldn't know, but the fact, well, I could say one other thing that might be relevant. When I came to the State Department, I'm not talking about the Foreign Service, but in the whole, just to give you a sense of the environment of the time,
Right.
in the whole State Department, there was one other Jew, Herbert Feist, who was
Right.
the economic advisor to Secretary Hall. And then Atchison invited me to come. Oh, I didn't know what the count was, and the State Department had a reputation. I said, you do your
Right.
work.
Right.
I never had any sense of a problem. I had one and two intersections with Breckinridge Long, who had a very bad reputation.
As an anti-Semite.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But I never saw it.
Okay.
The Hall, not Hall. I'm sorry. Secretary Morgenthau,
Mm-hmm.
in a meeting that involved work that I've been doing with the Treasury, really said that Long, you have a bad reputation. Morgenthau was Jewish. He was not exact. He was not exactly an Orthodox.
Right, not
Jew.
from the shtetl.
But no,
Dutchess
not from-
County.
Yeah, but and he didn't hide it.
Right.
But he, as far as I know, he was not a Jew who would show up at Saturday service and show.
Right.
But
right.
no, I had absolutely no sense of
Right.
that, and it may have been my naivete. But
Did you have a continuing relationship with Frankfurter during the Atchison work and then into the Nuremberg work?
I wouldn't say continuing. I sent. This was afterwards. I didn't see. I didn't see Frankfurter when I was in Washington. I saw him later, and I don't know if he had anything to do with Shea recruiting me. I doubt that he did. I just knew a lot of folks.
Right, you were in the orbit.
I just, and, but Frankfurter came out. Frankfurter came out to give a talk at the law school and so on.
Right, sure.
So I'm there. Oh, I tell you a great story involving Frankfurter and Danny Meltzer.
Okay.
Well, when Danny was 12 or 13 or whatever it was, that age, I took him to Washington and showed him Mount Vernon and the FBI and so on. I took him in to see Felix. And Felix, and Danny had a great sweet tooth.
Okay.
And Felix put out a bag of what he considered candy, and he gave some to Danny. He said, I want to tell you, I have this candy. He said, a couple weeks ago, another friend of mine brought his son in, and as they were leaving, I gave him some candy. And as they were leaving, the boy turned to his father and said, "Oh, Mr. Frankfurter is a nice man, but he certainly has lousy candy." So I got some new candy. So he hands Danny this, and I looked at Danny, and there's nothing in the way of chewing or sucking. So I wait until I get way out of earshot. I said, "Danny, how is the candy?" And Danny said, "Dad, I didn't eat it. David Levy was here last week, and Mr. Frankfurter told him the same story, and David said the candy was still lousy, so I stuck it into the cuff of my pants."
That's great.
The other, I forget whether it was then, some other time I came with Gene, I just came with Gene to listen to an argument. I have a perfectly good seat,
Sure.
and Frankfurter spots me. He sends the page, moves in the VIP, and I had obviously my status had risen, my visibility, the visibility of the court had gone down.
Right.
So that I corresponded with Frankfurter. I sent him a reprint. He'd always say, he'd read it. He read it.
Right.
I purported to.
Right.
And he said sometimes, he always said, "Well, you professors," he said, "you don't realize what you have to put in to get him a job." I said, I realize that. All I have to criticize is what's
what you
down
wrote.
there on the paper.
Right. Tell the story about your exchange with Jackson after he wrote the Stein case and then you wrote the article.
Yeah, maybe it'll tell. I wrote the article, and I remember it came back on a correspondence card. And I was very pleased with it. And he said, nice sentence here, "I wish I'd had your article before me when I wrote the opinion." And then, in, what the heck was the name of the case? It'll come back to me in a minute. The court overturned.
Right.
And I studied the article.
Right.
So.
Can you shed any light on Frankfurter's sort of tutoring and maybe even lobbying Bob Jackson about Jewish matters?
Yeah.
I mean, that friendship was very important to both of them, obviously.
And it was
and there was some, but I don't have a handle on what degree.
Interesting.
But sort of like early
Zionism,
Zionism, Palestine, that kind of stuff.
Well, that's very interesting. Now I tell you what I can tell you, which is sort of peripherally relevant. When I came to Chicago for reasons that were quite accidental, I joined a temple. Well, they'd had a split, and the guy who sold me a car was a big wheel, so I sent a contribution. It happened to be the contribution was the year's dues,
So you remember.
And the guy said, let us put, I said, I have membership. Oh, please, please, please. And my older brother was a big supporter. So, because the rabbi was really a social reformer. He was really not interested so much in Judaism.
Right.
But anyhow, he wrote something in the house organ. He really wrote an attack on Frank.
Wait, this wasn't Ben Perlmutter, was it?
No, I don't know. It was Weinstein.
Okay.
Jacob Weinstein.
Okay.
He was a guy who said the three great Jewish prophets were Moses, Maimonides, and Sidney Hillman. And Jean's father, my wife's father, immediately resigned from the temple. But anyhow, so he attacks Frankfurter for not being strong enough on Zionism and for marrying a Christian woman, a wonderful woman, Marion,
right,
whom I didn't know well, but when I was a student, Frankfurter invited me to dinner, so I met her. So I decided, instead of having one of these unwritten letters,
right,
so I wrote the guy a letter for the public. And I said something, about Frankfurter's interest in Zionism. But anyhow, there are limits on the Supreme Court. And then I remember my last line, which I cherish. I accuse, particularly with respect to Marion, I accuse the rabbi of lacking Christian charity.
That is a good line.
So, anyhow.
I think a lot of the Jewish pressure or anti-Jewish
Brandeis, you see.
pressure.
Brandeis was a big Zionist.
Right. But aiming at Jackson at Nuremberg, and as he's going to Nuremberg, people like Rabbi Stephen Wise want to get their 2 cents in, and people try and work through Frankfurter to kind of influence Jackson.
Well, I'll tell you, see, foreign funds control. Well, this is a long story. Foreign funds control. One of the last things I did. This is I'll tell you. Involved a program for rescuing Romanian Jews, particularly children.
Okay.
And the deal was that people had to be paid off in occupied territory, would get francs deposited in Switzerland, blocked until the end of the war, and not unblocked until American governmental representative and some Jewish representative said okay. So that the possibility of this helping the Nazis during the war was quite remote. And normally the foreign funds control people and the Treasury were absolute. No openings in the blockade. But the Treasury and foreign funds were willing to go along with this. It started when Dr. Nahum Goldman, who was president of the World Jewish Congress, came to see me at the suggestion of Rabbi Wise. So we worked this out with Treasury. Breckenridge Long's outfit, which normally was not concerned about the financial technicalities, but often had political reasons for our opening the spigot a little bit, to switch. They were against this for technical reasons. Well, this took a hell of a long time, and that is when Morgenthau came over and accused
And makes the comment to Long.
Long. And Long, I'm in the Navy then.
Yeah.
Long puts it on me. And Morgenthau knows from his Treasury people that the two guys in the State Department who are for this are Herbert Feiss and I.
Right.
And in fact, it was, my division worked out the technical things, and then the Secretary, the Treasury, ratified it and so on. So, well then, there is, David Wyman's book, The Abandonment of the Jews? Well, he has some of this in his book. And he also has an encyclopedia of the documents. He has a whole volume, I forget, I think it's U.S. and the Holocaust. But anyhow, it ends up, I'm in the Navy, and I talked to some guy at the Treasury, about what what the State Department's view was and so on. And Morgenthau says, hey, this is really paranoid. He says, hey, this guy, listen, the State Department, Long, may go after Meltzer when he's in the Navy. He said, tell Meltzer that if a ton of bricks falls on him, to let you know, and I will get in touch with Secretary Knox. It was absolutely incredible,
Right.
how, but the relations, well, the Treasury Department, because we were always an obstacle.
Right.
And the Treasury Department had no love for me, except in this case.
Right.
And the Treasury wanted to freeze Argentina, put them under the same blockade as Switzerland. Argentina's selling beef to the British.
Okay.
And we didn't have any economic staff, Feiss, he just held Hull's hand. So our boys make the best analysis we could. Said, this is really crazy. It's saying, you're a bunch of bastards. But they got the leverage, okay? They got the food. So we're against this. From then on, we're a bunch of fascists. The Treasury had thousands. If we'd have a meeting, they'd send 10 guys over. And those guys would scream at us.
Right.
And we'd go fast. So I remember John Paley, he was head sort of my house. He said, oh, Meltzer took all these terrible positions, but here shows you how strongly he felt. He talked to our guy. Oh, it just really, it's a comedy, but it has a tragic aspect.
Right.
By the time we got the license totally, by then it was too late.
Okay.
See, the other thing we didn't want to do, there were other plans. They wanted us to trade Jewish children for trucks. And I said, we do not want American supplied trucks being used to shoot
American soldiers. Right.
But there was
How much of what we now sort of categorize as the Holocaust did you know before you went over, and how much did you learn at Nuremberg?
Well, in the course of this licensing business, and what was the catalyst for it, was a report from Byrne based on a reliable source. And that indicated that there was a plan for extermination. Now, given the atrocity stories, World War One, everybody was agnostic at the beginning, even though we read Mein Kampf and so on. But when this came in, it had the ring of authenticity. And it was then that the hypothesis that this was going on became plausible. And I was gone when more evidence came. But in 43, if not earlier, I understood that this was something much graver than, persecution or anti-Semitism or social variety. Of course, the change in the atmosphere of this country, say after the war, from afterward to the present, I mean, when I came to the University of Chicago Law School faculty, we had one half of a Jew, Wilbur Kotz.
Wow.
And a guy whose name I have to retrieve, I've forgotten, who was a big wheel at Harvard, said that the reason Wilbur Kotz, who had written a casebook with Felix, was not offered an appointment was anti-Semitic. And if you look at the Harvard Law School then.
Right. Oh, right, absolutely.
And these kids were coming up from all over, especially from CCNY, smart kids, who won a disproportionate number of, prizes.
Right.
Like,
Right. Yeah.
so an enormous change.
Right.
And kids who wanted to do graduate work in English before the war, Jewish kids, were discouraged. There's a wonderful essay by Diane Turley about Lionel Turley. At Columbia,
Right.
because he was Jewish.
Right.
And his reception, he was the first Jew.
He was the first Jew in English.
Yeah, oh yeah. And it was made clear that there was not to be, a great migration.
Right.
He was special.
Right.
And so, but just so wonderful. And it's in commentary some years back. The whole atmosphere is just, and I think, who knows about causality, but I do think that the Nazi business had an enormous impact.
Right.
So
Okay. I've
Okay.
overused you, but
Well,
as always, this is great.